And we're live! I get to say that again this week.
Hello.
Yes, hello! Cecil Lammy, I think he has a celebrity golf tournament to broadcast from, some marathon thing, so we're letting him give his golden pipes a little bit of a rest. I get to drive here and hang out tonight, the Audible hangout, and it's the calm before the storm. Actually, here in Austin it is storming, so guys, if I just drop out, the show must go on. But training camp next week. All off season, we've been obsessing about all of this stuff, discussing all of these changing situations, and now hundreds of thousands, millions of people are going to start caring about all these things we've been saying. And those of you out there right now, you've been caring all along. That's why we love you. We love that you support us and join us and us. First, Mr. Matt Waldman. Matt, how's the moving going? You look comfy, man.
Yeah, it's going pretty good. Still kind of got some things that got to get settled in the office here, but overall pretty good. And, you know, my loyal assistant somewhere hanging around the house, probably trying to get outside now that he's gotten a taste of the outdoors a bit. So we'll see if he can avoid the construction. He's been.
Is he beating up every other cat in the neighborhood?
We haven't seen any. I'm afraid he's going to drag. Yeah, I'm afraid he's going to drag in a fox, though.
Is he fast enough to get to a fox?
He's sneaky. He used to be.
Fast.
Yeah, just tell him to stay away from squirrels.
He's a wily veteran, right?
He is a wily veteran. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a sack artist. But he has to stay away from squirrels, or he will incur the wrath of the squirrel whisperer, Mr. Gene Bramall. And we are happy to have Gene here tonight. Gene, good evening.
Good evening indeed. I'm happy Matt's out of his cave. Glad we got that figured out. But I'm continually jealous of the hats that Matt wears. Those of you who just listen to the podcast in the next couple of days, try to catch the video podcast at some point and check out Matt's hat.
Well, it's not just the hats, because anybody can wear hats. He wears them well.
This is true.
You wear them well. You've got some panache or savoir-faire, which, you know, in fantasy football, there's no place for panache in fantasy football. Like no crying in baseball, there's no panache in fantasy football. But you thought that was true until you tuned in tonight. As of this week compared to last week, we don't really have that much new to talk about. A few new things. We got a lot of Audible Lives questions. I think we won't wait until the end to get into our Audible Live questions. We appreciate that. Again, as Gene said, if you're listening, you can tune into this live on Thursday nights at 10 p.m. and use Twitter as the chat. I know that we don't have the Blog Talk Radio chat anymore, but we still have the ability to be responsive in the moment. And we will give you the opportunity sometimes to set the agenda. Before we jump into the agenda, I do want to tell everybody, speaking of the calm before the storm, Football Guys is firing up. We just made a brand new round of hires. We're going to be doing a bunch of new stuff in the daily space and many other areas. Our apps are out there, okay? If you are not a Football Guys subscriber, if you're not Insider Pro, and you're thinking about taking the plunge, get an app. $4.99. You get the mobile draft dominator, or the magazine, or both. But guess what? If you get either one of those, they're $4.99, and you use the Cloud Sync option, you will automatically, in your inbox, get our training camp updates, an $8.95 value. We have one person following each team during training camp, distilling it down to about 1,000 words of what you need to know from training camp and preseason for each team, position by position. You get that for free if you buy an app. If you're not quite sure about Football Guys, that's a great first step. Second step, Insider Pro subscription. You'll get everything. We're going to be with you through the Super Bowl. Trust me, you will have more than you know what to do with. You're obsessed, we're obsessed, all of us. And money back guarantee. And believe me, hey, if it's not for you, then we'll go our separate ways. I think it's going to be for you, though. If you're watching this show, listening to this show, Football Guys Insider Pro is for you. And, of course, the Football Guys Players Championship is filling up. 7,500 teams once we get there. That's it. $300,000 first prize, a $350 entry. Life-changing money. The Football Guys Players Championship. And that's what we do. We dish out the information that either helps you win that stuff or at the very least gives you someone to blame if you don't. Gene, let's start with just some hard information. And David Wilson is now we're hearing that David Wilson is expected to be cleared on Monday. Does this even change how you're looking at Wilson from a fantasy standpoint? And do you think, at least from the medical aspect, not so much, and feel free to riff on the non-medical aspect, do you think in general people looking for something from David Wilson this year are foolish, even though he's an uber talented back with this kind of injury and this kind of offseason is asking a lot? Or do you think, hey, no, I mean, if he's cleared and he's in camp and he's practicing and he's playing in the preseason, obviously Rashad Jennings is there. It's a little different than last year, but he still can be a very fantasy relevant player.
Yeah, I think the first step is that he needs to get cleared, and there's lots of indications today that that's going to be the case. He's going to have an exam just on the first day of Giants training camp, either late this week or early next week, and we'll sort of see how that goes. If he is cleared to go this year, and if he is ready to take consecutive practices immediately, I think that's a very good sign for his future. But as you mentioned, Rashad Jennings being there, we're not really sure what we got with Andre Williams yet. There's a number of options. There's going to be some competition there for Wilson, but I think if Wilson is healthy, although there were times last year where he wasn't as productive as we hoped he'd be, I think he can be that player this year. We need to wait and see if he's cleared. Let's see if he can get through consecutive practices. Hopefully, even though he hasn't been cleared for contact, we've seen him take handoffs and OTAs. He should be conditioned and ready enough to go as we start the season this year. But really, first step is let's see how and whether he's cleared for contact, and if that happens, then hopefully he's got enough time to catch up and be ready to go.
And we'll continue to monitor these situations and continue to pick the brain of the good doctor as we progress. But Matt's Gut Check 302, if you didn't listen to the couch yet this week, fantastic, unbelievably detailed PPR tiers. Lots of undervalued, overvalued players, Matt. I'm giving away subscriber content. One of your highest undervalued players is Rashad Jennings. Now, if we see David Wilson show up and, as Gene said, take consecutive practices, basically pick up where he left off, how much does that change your Jennings outlook, or does it?
It changes it a fair amount. And I think what I would do is I would start cautiously dropping him. I'm not going to drop him like, I weight him down with a rock and throw him into the East River, but it's going to be one of those types of deals where we are going to let the helium we're going to let the helium out of the balloon slowly here and just make sure that Wilson can stay healthy and maintain good ball security and not make stupid mistakes throughout the preseason. Because if the better Wilson looks, the more it's going to start to even out. And I think that if Wilson looks like people have hoped he would look and what he's capable of, then I think that you're going to see cautiously a 50-50 split to start the season. But I don't think it's going to go that swimmingly early on. And I do think that this team, I'll put on the if I have the tinfoil hat under here, the take would be basically that this is the club saying we would really like to see David Wilson get to where he needs to be, and we really want to see him get on the field. And even if he's not feeling quite right, we want to see something here. Now, I think that again, tinfoil hat kind of stuff there, but we've seen teams send messages before through the media that are either, to encourage a player along a little bit more than they need to, and we've heard players even complain about it in the past. Certainly, I know Ben Tate complained about Rick Smits in the media talking about how, about him and questioning his toughness early on in his career. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think Jennings you still go with, but you slowly let out the helium a little bit on that rating if you have him rated as high as I do.
And I think you're right that it's not going to be, it would move towards 50-50. It could be a dreaded RBBC where, they're both talented guys, and in any given week, this week might be David Wilson, 12 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown, 2 catches for 35 yards, and maybe Jennings only has 13 carries for 36 yards, and then next week they flip. And the next week they flip, especially if they are going more up-tempo, as we've heard in that offense, in the McAdoo offense. Another medical note, Gene, and this gives us a chance, too, to have an entree, speaking of training camp and getting ready for training camp, and I think Gene has his picture up, so I'm not quite sure he is available for us. So let me come back possibly to Gene. we may or may not have Gene tonight. So let's go back, and I'll ask you, Matt, about what I was going to ask Gene. We see today that Marcus Lattimore is going to be on the active non-football injury list, and I mean, we're almost 2 years after his knee injury, and he's still being treated like a player coming off of an off-season surgery. And I loved Lattimore the person. I loved him as a runner. A beautiful, beautiful runner. But is it time, Matt? I mean, is it time for us to say? And there's Zook. Is it time for us to say, unless something changes dramatically, that let's move on from Lattimore? I mean, really, was it time to do that when they drafted Carlos Hyde?
Well, the feline version of Carrion hopped up here when you mentioned him, so I think we know that that basically that this is probably, I mean, it's telling. It is. This is a lot like the Robert Edwards situation after the first year. If you remember, the New England running back out of Georgia, who was massively talented, converted from defensive back to running back at the University of Georgia, and had a terrific season or two, and then went on to have a Pro Bowl season and injured his knee and had nerve damage, and ended up, a few years later, found his way to Miami and played as a third down back, and then no team in the NFL would really want to touch him. And he ended up in the CFL for a while and played fairly well. But this kind of looks a lot like that situation, even though the injuries are different. But 2 years from now, and he still hasn't regained the burst, and that's what they're saying, is it hasn't come back. This is a pretty good time at this point to I would say, to cut your losses. I mean, barring some sort of light switch that comes on miraculously, and it possibly could, then maybe we scramble to get him. But I don't think that that's really going to happen.
All right. From across the pond, while we have Gene, who is indisposed at the moment, we couldn't just, I mean, Matt and I just did the couch this week, so we can't, what good would another hour of that do? So we have, this is like the bullpen. We made a call to the bullpen all the way in Ireland. And what time is it right now, Kian? What time is it in Ireland?
3:25.
3:25. And he says it like
dark inside.
That's
That's the film watching hour.
Now the film's over. Too much work done this week.
Yes. And it is great to have Mr. Football Guys, Bleacher Report, many other pre-snap reads, and many other great sources out there. Kian Fahey joining us. First time on the Audible Live. And you've been busy, man. You've been doing lots of stuff. Just tell people out there what you've been doing, because I know there's some articles we're going to talk about that you've been doing that people should be taking an interest in.
Well, for Football Guys, recently I've been looking at Spiller and Greg Jennings, two guys who I really, really like. I presume that's who you're talking about. The last week I've been spent in college football, college quarterbacks, trying to steal all Matt's work. So, I don't know, outside of them, I don't think there's much point talking about them at this stage, because they have another year to go. But, no, mostly that. And actually, I was interested to get Gene's take on Jonathan Stewart, but obviously Gene's disappeared. So,
and we'll see. He's healthy. And I certainly think, something he mentioned about David Wilson. We're going to be watching Jonathan Stewart's practice participation in training camp to see just how healthy he is. Let's start with Spiller, though. Let's jump into Spiller, because I have been a big Spiller guy. But Kian, you do excellent film study, and you go into it really without any preconceived notions. Like, you're not trying to prove or disprove something. You just go in and let the film tell you the story. Like your Mike Glennon article from earlier this offseason, where he's like, hey, I watched him, and he's a lot better than people think he is. What about Spiller? What did you discover? What jumped out at you as you were examining Spiller?
Well, the funny thing with Spiller is what jumped out to me was actually had nothing to do with him, and it was the offensive line. With the left guard spot there last year, I think it was Legursky, and I can't even remember the name of the other fella because he was just so bad. Like in the article I wrote, there was literally a point where Will Fork just went straight through him, and he actually covered both of Spiller's running lanes, and there was a lot of that where you're kind of blaming Spiller for not making a play, but in reality is he's got nowhere to go, so he can't make a play. And then when you had the ankle injury in, And the ankle injury, you could notice he was slower. He wasn't as fast, but he still led the league in 40-plus yard runs, and he was second in 20-plus yard runs. So the explosion was there. And my whole argument with Spiller was that they've addressed the offensive line. They've brought in new right tackle in Kouanjo in the draft, and they've brought in Sir Richardson and Chris Williams to compete for the left guard spot. And I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. It'll be interesting to watch in camp. But if he's healthy and the offensive line is even halfway decent, I'll be very excited about his potential, especially as a receiving back as well.
So, you're jumping into, you're going to be in Football Guys, staff mocks, and things like that. After watching that, are you targeting him, and about where would you target him in drafts? I've been taking him in the third round. Would you sign off on that?
Yeah, I've been getting him in the third a lot as well. But if I'm kind of half concerned that someone else is going to grab him before me, I'll happily take him in the second as well.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, he was a top 5 pick last year, so it's not crazy to take him in the late second if you see that. But Matt, and there, well, we can actually get. And Gene looks mad. Are you mad, Gene? Is there someone next to you now?
That's why I just changed my tagline to "replaced by an Irishman."
Yes.
No, I'm not mad. Kean can take my place anytime.
They're taking our gerbs.
It's all good, man.
So, Matt, you are not the biggest C.J. Spiller fan coming out of Clemson. And I don't want to say begrudgingly, but, you've tempered that some. So where do you fall on Spiller now? Because we have this gulf here where maybe he was overrated as a top 5 pick last year. Is he underrated as a third-round pick?
I think he could be underrated as a third-round pick, and I think that the way Kean describes it is, how's the offensive line going to shape up? The offensive line looks good, and Spiller can stay healthy during the preseason, and he doesn't have any nagging injuries going into the year, then I think that he's a player. Right now I have him as a early to mid 4th-round pick, meaning he's not going to wind up to me at this stage in drafts right now. But if he looks good, continues to look good in the preseason, and there's, nothing else is changing in terms of how he's performing, if the offensive line looks good, then yeah, I can see bumping him up a little bit more and giving him the opportunity to, as somebody that I would take in the 3rd round, maybe a little bit higher. He could be underrated. It really depends on also what you look at with this offense. Do you feel like, in addition to the offensive line, how good is the passing game going to be? How much of a split are you going to be looking at here? And the only thing that I would look at with him that concerns me is, while he's stayed fairly healthy over the years, he's had he's had a couple of seasons where you can look at and say that he's done fairly well. He's had some nagging injuries even when he's played that have limited him, and this was an issue that went back to his college days. When John Gruden is talking to you on one of those QB camp shows, and they actually interviewed a non-quarterback, and one of the main thrusts of his conversation with Spiller was, are you going to be that guy who's always nicked up and misses a number of series and just doesn't play the way that he could because you're always banged up? And it's kind of telling that we've seen some of that with Spiller so far. Can he grow out of it? Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've seen players do that. So the talent's there. He's a massive talent. He has certainly learned how to be more judicious with how he does, in terms of how he hits holes, and he doesn't always bounce everything outside the way he used to. So certainly the potential's there for him to be a top 12 player.
Okay, so Gene, this is, and this is me crafting my narratives in the way that I do, sometimes rigging the game, because I say, hey, he had a high ankle sprain early last year. He played through it and played, I wouldn't say played poorly through it, but had to be spelled, couldn't stay on the field, for many consecutive plays. He lost enough of his acceleration, enough of his lateral agility that he didn't quite look like himself. But then as soon as he had a week off last year, he looked like his old self. When those 2 times he took a week off, one was for the bye, one was a game that he sat out, the next week he was that 2012 lightning in a bottle player. So is it right to hold that against him and say, hey, nagging injury all year, I'm not going to put a happy ending on this and say, well, look at how good he was if he was just a little bit healthier? Or, is this one where you're going to say, no, you're not far off, actually. Just because he couldn't play through a high ankle sprain last year, doesn't mean that that's going to happen this year. And in fact, if he has a high ankle sprain, they'll be smart. They'll sit him for 3 or 4 weeks, and then you'll get 10 weeks of the good Spiller.
I think either one. I mean, I think both of those narratives are reasonable narratives, and for the reasons that you laid out. Some people that would be nervous about taking a player that they might perceive as injury prone, somebody that's had some nagging injuries in the past, as Spiller has had, may not be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt this year. But I saw the same thing you saw last year, which was as he tried to play through that injury, he was not laterally explosive. And we know that's an injury that can cause those sort of symptoms and that sort of issue for a player of Spiller's character. So, if he looks healthy through the preseason, then I think there's reason to expect if he can get 200 healthy carries rather than 150 to 175 not so healthy carries, that Spiller can be there's going to be some variance involved, but I think he can be a high upside running back too with a little bit more upside than that. So I don't know that, I think whichever narrative you choose to buy into there says more about what your personal philosophy is about injured players and players who may or may not be capable of handling 250 to 300 touch seasons more than Spiller himself particularly. So, but I'm hopeful that we'll see the old Spiller in camp and we'll have what happened last year put behind him, and then your decision is mostly, is he going to get enough opportunity to hit his ceiling or not? And I think that, depending on what you think of Bryce Brown, I think he probably can. So let's hope that we see Spiller healthy, and then we'll discuss him more from there as August moves along.
So, and again, where the rubber meets the road, and I know you haven't done your offensive tiers and things yet, but just your first approach, and let's toss Roddy White in too. I mean, are you, and we can assume, let's assume for a second that it's August 1st and early on it's been uneventful in training camp for these guys as business as usual. Are you going to treat them basically the same way you would have treated them going into last year? Or is last year kind of a black mark on their record that you are going to factor in when you rank them this year?
Assuming they both look healthy during training camp, I don't think I'm likely to hold last year's season against Spiller. Roddy White's a year older. I'd like to see how he moves. I'd be a little bit more skeptical that White, at his age, is able to move as well. This is about the time where we might expect him to start losing a quarter step or so anyway. I wouldn't hold the high ankle sprain against him necessarily, but I would like to see him moving well in camp. These type of players, we talk a lot about injury-prone stuff, and we talk about, those sorts of injuries and whether or not they'll hold people back. I really like to get a look at the first couple of weeks of camp. Are they able to take consecutive practices? I know I sound like a broken record here, but this is really what I tend to rely on with these veterans, where we just don't know where their recovery level is. And even if they hadn't been, we might say the same thing about Spiller, certainly about White, even if they hadn't had those high ankle sprains last year and just had a little bit of a tough season. You ask yourself, was it conditioning? Was it age-related? Was it talent-related? Are we finally hitting the cliff for each of them in their own way or not? So I like to see how the teams are approaching their health and whether or not they're managing practice reps in those first couple of weeks of camp, and then how they look, how many reps are they getting in the first couple of preseason games, and how do they look? They may not be going full go necessarily, but you can get a sense of, just by watching the film, how are they moving? Do they trust themselves? Do they just need a few reps to get out there and start getting into football shape, or are they taking a little bit more time, and how do they look from one week to the next? That's a long way to answer your question, unfortunately. But I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking here is, yes, I really haven't done my tiers yet. I'd be hedging with both of those guys. I'd probably have Spiller in that running back 2 tier. I like guys with his type of upside. So, I'm going to be looking at him in those areas that, you and Kean were just talking about there. This is the kind of area that I'm going to be looking at him in. And the same thing goes with Roddy White. But very much I'm going to be interested in seeing how those first 2 or 3 weeks of preseason goes. And then, I really think we'll have an answer on both of those guys long before most of you guys are doing your redrafts in the third and fourth week of the preseason.
Absolutely, and then that's where we're going to parse all of this stuff. Again, going back to those training camp reports. I mean, we're going to be parsing everything we see. Now, it's 3:35 in Ireland. I do not want Kean to fall asleep on air, although it would be pretty funny. I mean, that would be cool to have footage of someone asleep, just the ultimate endorsement of our show. But I'm glad that Kean wants to ask you this, Gene, because for once, I am not the one asking this question. Kean came on, he specifically had a question for you. And as Rumford Johnny said, no, there will not be subtitles, Gene, so listen closely.
I don't need subtitles, I'm good.
Well, I asked you the question the other day anyway, so it's about Jonathan Stewart and what we should expect health-wise.
what we should expect health-wise from Jonathan Stewart, I think, his legs are older than his age would suggest. It's a good sign that he made it through the off-season without needing any additional surgeries and that he was able to do some workouts in OTAs and mini camps. Is he the same player? Is he a player you'd expect a 27-year-old to be, or whatever he is now? I think he's 27, isn't he? I don't know. I don't think we can expect that from him. I think the type of surgery that, although it's never been reported, I think he probably had a microfracture surgery. I would be surprised if we saw the old Jonathan Stewart is close to the old Jonathan Stewart. No pun intended with the old comment there. Is close to the old Jonathan Stewart. Good enough? Yes. Is he good enough to push D'Angelo Williams to the side? Is he good enough to overcome whatever chronic issues he may continue to have with his ankle? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm a little bit more optimistic about him this year than I was last year, but he still has to show me that he's capable of doing the things that we liked seeing from him on the field early in camp as well before I would trust him as anything more than a redraft flyer type situation.
Okay, Gina, while we've got you, we're hammering away here. But we talked about this while you were out. The news about Marcus Lattimore starting on the NFI.
Not good. Not good. I didn't really see why. I just saw a couple of tweets that had happened. Do we know if it was conditioning based or if it was just not ready to go based? It would worry me a lot if he's still not feeling well enough to be in good enough condition to start camp.
Field Yates from ESPN says procedural move as running back continues rehab process.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. We knew it was a devastating injury. What we hoped was he'd be, that the ACL was the only issue. We kind of fixed that up, and everything else during the ACL rehab process would kind of iron itself out. No one expected him to be on the field last year. Maybe there was a little bit of hope that was held out that he'd be able to get, they'd bring him off PUP, give him a couple of weeks of practice and sort of see how things go. Not that he'd get on the field, but be able to get some reps and pads. And I know that's difficult as the end of the season goes along because there's just not that many reps to go along. But it really would have been nice to see him take some meaningful reps in OTAs and in minicamp, and if they're not ready to clear him to take any meaningful reps in the beginning of training camp, when's it going to happen? How long are they going to continue to stash him on injured reserve? They've got lots and lots of injured players. They've got to find a place for these guys. If he's not ready for the beginning of training camp, it's really hard to see him being activated and ready to go. We see a lot of guys put on these, it's still NFI. So that tells you that it's still related to the injury from 2 years ago. It's not something that's new. It's something that, it's related to the injury that happened before the draft. Otherwise, he wouldn't be allowed to be put on the NFI list.
Yeah, so talk about that really quick.
So,
explain to everybody out there, explain to me again for that matter, what's the difference between NFI? Well, what do we have coming up here, Gene? This is kind of like a training camp primer, right? Because we're going to have NFI, and there's 2 different PUP lists guys can be put on, right?
Yeah, and so there's one for now. So there's a preseason PUP list, which is called the active PUP list, and then there's a regular season PUP list, which is the reserve PUP list. So you're not going to see anybody put on reserve PUP right now. They're all going to, because or at least until I take that back. If you've been in a training camp practice, you can't go on any of these lists. So we may see somebody go on a reserve list at some point in the future, but it would be an injured reserve list, either with the designated return or not. But that reserve PUP list is reserved for players as they come out of training camp when, you can't put them on the 53 roster. They get transferred from the active PUP list to the reserve PUP list. So you're going to see 2 classifications in the next 10 days as we got. I think the Bills are starting early, and I don't remember who's late, but there's about a 10-day window here where camps start. We're going to hear all this stuff come out. Players who have an injury that did not happen during a football-related activity, so guys like Kiko Alonso, other players like that will be put on the NFI list, even though it was, he was working out. It didn't happen in a football-related, team-related activity. So those guys are going to go on the NFI list. So I guess it's possible that Lattimore, something happened that I'm not aware of this offseason that wasn't related to a team-related activity, and he was eligible for the NFI list. But what that most likely tells me is that he's still, this injury dates back to before he was drafted. And then we've got the active PUP list. So if something happened from a football-related activity standpoint, those guys get put on that list, and they can be activated from either list at any time during training camp until the 53-man roster has to be solidified. The other reason guys go on the NFI list is they're just not in condition. So that's why I asked that question. Is an issue where they're just a little bit worried about his conditioning, and hopefully in a week or two he'll be deemed ready to be able to take practice reps. But for a guy like Lattimore, really the only reason he's not in condition, a guy that we know has always been a high character guy, somebody with a great work ethic who we know has been rehabbing appropriately. I don't think the reason he's on NFI is because he's just not in condition yet, because he should have been and is not. Almost is certainly related to that catastrophic injury he had before. And that being the case, it's pushing 20 months now since that injury. So, we were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt for 12 to 18 months there, but now that he's not ready for a second training camp, it's time to be concerned whether or not he'll even be on the roster. Period. Maybe they put him on injured reserve and try to carry him for another year, but with Carlos Hyde there and all the other guys they've had, the writing's on the wall for Lattimore, unfortunately.
Okay, now, Keane, we got you here tonight again before you fall asleep or otherwise if I'm up at 3:42 in the morning, it probably doesn't have anything to do with football, but I shouldn't say. Where someone say Saucy Q and stop me. You mentioned Greg Jennings. What did you discover in your Jennings? Because I mentioned Run for Johnny already once from Two Mugs, and he's a Jennings guy. And, especially if Matt Castle's the quarterback, but maybe even not if Matt Castle's the quarterback. Greg Jennings, until 2 or 3 years ago, he had some nagging injuries, but we were talking about Greg Jennings 2 or 3 years ago. He is, one of the 20 or 25 best receivers in the league, and it isn't like, that's what you're about to tell us, Keane, how Kings and their kind of putrid offensive season, and how much of it was Jennings, because he is an afterthought now. You rarely see guys. He's 30, going to turn 31. That's not ancient for wide receivers, and you can provide some context with the results of your film study. Is everybody making a mistake letting Jennings fall to I'm seeing 12th, 13th, 14th round?
Yeah, well, I've been grabbing him in the 10th round all the time because I just want to make sure I get him, because I'm very confident in how good he can be. Most of his struggles last year were the offense around him. I think he's very much the same receiver that he was in Green Bay. He had 5 drops last year, 5 that I counted, and PFF had the same. They had 5 as well. And they all came on passes from Ponder, and they were all what I called contested situations where it was tight coverage or it was a very difficult pass that he had to quickly adjust to. And so that means he caught every single relatively catchable target from Matt Castle. So, and then when you looked at the numbers that he had with Castle and you project him to a 16-game season, the difference was massive. All the actual numbers are in the article itself if you want to see him on Football Guys. But in terms of is it him or is it the offense around him, I think it's massively the offense around him. I think he can be good value with Castle, and I think he could be potentially great value with Bridgewater, because Jennings is the kind of guy who runs beautiful routes. He can come free in any area of the field, and he would really, really benefit from a guy who's going to throw the ball on time, even if it's not perfectly accurate all the time, because Jennings will be in the right spot where he's supposed to be, and that's the kind of thing that Bridgewater, I think, will excel at. And even last year, there was a game I think it was against the Panthers, where they threw him 3 screen passes, or passes where he ran behind the line of scrimmage, lined up behind the line of scrimmage, and ran behind it, and he had 3 separate plays for no gain, 3 receptions, and you're just kind of looking at it going, they weren't using him to his strengths. So the coaching staff might even help him. So I'm very, very high on him. I'm grabbing him in the 10th at the moment because he's falling that far. Just like Spiller, though, if I think there's a threat there, and even in the 8th or the 9th, I'll take him if I feel I need to.
Yeah, Jennings, and there's a few guys like this. Dwayne Bowe comes to mind also, where people are already moving on, but maybe they're not. Matt, you were nodding. Is that agreement on Jennings, or is that just what you do anytime someone starts talking about Teddy Bridgewater?
No, I'm nodding about Greg Jennings, because Jennings is actually a guy that I find underrated as well. I have him as a 7th and 8th round value, actually, in terms of my projections for him, which I think are fairly conservative because of the unknown at quarterback and what's going to happen with the offense in terms of how well they'll execute. I have him as the top of the 7th round value. And but I know that with his ADP being the 135th pick overall, that you can get him much later, as Kian mentioned. I agree with everything that Kian said. I mean, I don't think anything's changed about him as a wide receiver other than some nagging injuries and just putrid quarterback play. And now that you have Norv Turner being able to come in there and install his style of offense, which is a really strong fit for Greg Jennings, and as Kian mentioned about Bridgewater and his potential as a anticipation thrower and finding the open man and hitting him in stride, this is really a great setup for him. And, of course, Cordero Patterson, if Cordero Patterson develops at the rate that people hope him to. But to me, the safest play in this offense, other than Adrian Peterson, is Greg Jennings, and he's probably the best bargain. So I'm right there with Kian, and I'm sure that he and I will be probably battling for him in mock drafts in the coming weeks at Football Guys when we have an opportunity.
I'm going to go to the Audible Live questions again, folks. If you are listening to this, and even if you want to get us a question, maybe you can't watch and listen live on Thursday night, but there's something on your mind that you want us to touch on, you can use the hashtag Audible Live to be able to get us something right on our desk where we can talk about it on the show. And I'm going to pull up some questions and just pass them around. Let's start with one from Mike Durbin at Durbinland. This is just a good broad question, and you can take it in a lot of directions. And Matt, I wanted you to take it first. What team with high expectations could fall flat on their face? What are this is kind of a training camp preview sort of question where a team that people are penciling in or maybe putting in pen in the playoffs or thinking that everything is good. And, we saw this happen with Atlanta. Now, it can be Atlanta, you could say they're intervening events, but, if you're depth, a lot of people cited lack of depth. Every team has to deal with injuries. The Steelers were a team that fell flat on their face right out of the gate last year. Obviously, the Texans come to mind. Is there any team that you can think of that pops into your mind? You think this year's Texans or Falcons, a team that could really surprise by how bad they are?
I actually have two others that I think probably fit into that category, and the first one is Cincinnati. And I think that Cincinnati, because of the change with the, with the what's going on?
I've seen Keane go.
Stole mine.
Oh, I took yours. Okay. Well, hey, great minds. So, but when I look at this, it's first of all, you look at the new offensive system, wanting to switch to the run a little bit more. We don't know whether or not Mr. Jeremy Hill is going to be all that and a bag of chips. And then you have, and you could see them maybe getting into this Jets-like cluster where they try to manage the carries in a way where neither back does as well as you think they would. Then you have, Geno Atkins coming back from injury, and you have these issues with, Zimmer gone from this defensive, coaching staff, and it just becomes one of these situations where maybe the quality of coaching, the quality of players returning, could really make this a mess. San Diego's another team that looked pretty good, and I think that there was a lot there that's promising, but then when you take a look at the fact that we never know which year Ryan Matthews is going to show up. I'm a big fan of his in terms of his talent, but is that going to work out? The wide receiver situation, do teams bracket Keenan Allen, and then who do they have to be able to solve that issue? Is it going to be Ladarius Green and his 22 yards per catch, and is how much more, is he going to be able to be consistently as good now that they're going to target him more than enough that he's not going to get just 17 catches in a season? Is Antonio Gates going to fall off a cliff? There's the defense that had some moments, and it looks like in the playoffs you could see some things happening that might be pretty good, especially with Melvin Ingram coming back and looking pretty darn good off the edge. But are they going to sustain that and build that? And those are the two teams that probably, to me, that I have a little bit of worries, and more Cincinnati than I do San Diego, though, and mainly because of those changes with Zimmer gone and Atkins coming back from injury and this whole running situation where I think the clear guy they should be just giving it to until they wear him out is Giovanni Bernard, and not worry about, well, we got to manage him a little bit. Let him be great for 3 or 4 years and then move on.
Okay, Kian, you were doing the sort of disappointed shake, but
Sorry.
why did the Bengals pop right in your head? I mean, I first became familiar with your writing at Steelers Depot, and I don't want Dan Rooney I don't want to say that maybe you're skewed here and you're just rooting against the Bengals. So give us some ammo here to add to what Matt said on why the Bengals could disappoint.
Well, a lot of it's the same, just the change over at coordinator positions. As well as Geno Atkins, you're losing Michael Johnson, who is maybe not one of the very best defensive ends in the league, but he was a consistent starter. And Leon Hall's coming off a second Achilles tear, and I don't think enough people realize just how good he is, because he's a proper shutdown slot cornerback. I wasn't a big fan of their draft either, and you're still looking at guys like Dre Kirkpatrick to develop, and he kind of hasn't really done much over the years. I don't think they're going to crash to the bottom 5. One of my big kind of issues with them is Dalton's been very average for a long time, and you're kind of wondering, is he eventually going to go up or is he going to go down? And I've more belief that he'll go down rather than up. One of the more interesting teams to me, it's not exactly a fit in the question, but I'm seeing a lot of positivity about them this year, is the Buccaneers. I'm seeing a lot of people predict them as a playoff team, and I can't buy into it, because I think Josh McCown is I'm a big Glennon fan, obviously, so maybe I'm a bit biased there, but I think Josh McCown isn't anywhere near as good as his stats suggested he was last year, and I'm not a major fan of their safety combination in Lovie Smith's defense. And outside of that, I think the Eagles as well have similar questions about Foles and how people will react to Chip Kelly in his second year.
Well, go back to Glennon for a second, because you wrote a really terrific article earlier this offseason at Football Guys about Glennon, and just touch on the high points of what you saw, because I think you opened my eyes and a lot of other people's eyes, or people were all seeing it at the same time. Like, wait a second, our expectations for rookie quarterbacks have gotten so out of whack that here we are seeing Mike Glennon as somebody who, in a typical curve for a rookie quarterback, excelled, and now they're bringing in Josh McCown to replace him.
Well, the interesting thing to me with Glennon last year was he didn't get to be the starter through training camp. He didn't get to enter the season as a starter, and he was thrown in and immediately held to Andrew Luck standards. And I kind of the first few weeks I kind of threw him out, because I was kind of thinking, look, he's been thrown in. He needs to get time down with receivers, all this kind of stuff. But once the season started going, I thought he played fairly well. My one major concern with him is he doesn't step up in the pocket when there's pressure coming from the outside. He likes to run and break into the flat. He can cover that because he throws fairly well on the run, and he places the ball well in his deep ball. But you've got, he had Vincent Jackson as a good receiver, and he had Tim Wright, who was showing flashes as a tight end. But outside of that, you're throwing to guys like Tequan Underwood, and they lost Mike Williams early in the year, and you're kind of looking at the weapons he's got, and they're not helping him at all. I thought his accuracy was good. I thought his poise in the pocket was good, except for those occasions when he didn't step up when he needed to. And I think he anticipated throws well. If you look at the Seattle game, he kind of knows when to take shots and when not to take shots down the field. And I didn't think he was anything special. I didn't think he was Luck or Griffin when he was a rookie, or Wilson or anything like that. But I thought he did more than enough to be a solid starter.
I thought the comment on Glennon is, I saw some of the same things last year studying the film against the Lions, and you saw, one of the things that they did very well was keeping the pocket clean for him, at least against the Lions in some cases. And he did show a little evidence of stepping up, but I agree with Kian that it was, not those situations didn't come a lot. He had a couple that were pretty good, and you can see some of the reasons of why he was succeeding was that clean pocket. More than anything else. But, with Zutta gone and going, to the Buccaneers, it's going to be interesting to see how that changes with this team. And with a new coaching situation as well, how is that really going to impact everything in McCown? One great part of a season statistically. What do you really have there? We've seen lots of guys who have had as good or better seasons than what McCown showed over that period of time flop. So
sure.
So what happens here?
Yeah, and both of these things that we've just talked about really highlight stories that, well, I'll step back and say this. Coordinators are really important in fantasy football. I mean, knowing coordinators, we had a great series from I think it was Kyle Wachtel. Sorry, Kyle, I'm pretty sure it was Kyle talking about new coordinators and their history and what effect they could have. Because last year, again, and I keep saying this stuff, and I'm sorry for those of you, like, I get it, but again, the three biggest breakout players that helped your fantasy teams, Jamal Charles, Matt Forte, LaShawn McCoy, coordinator changes, head coach changes. This is really important. And this intersects in all these stories we've just talked about. Was Josh McCown really good? I mean, is it something that transfers outside of the Trestman system, or is it Trestman? And then what does that mean if you think it's Trestman? What does that mean for Jay Cutler, who you can get outside of the top 12 quarterbacks? Andy Dalton, was it Andy Dalton, or was it? I think R. Andrew Garter wrote a preview of the Bengals for Sports on Earth. Great site, great writers there. Mike Tenier, among others. Was it that Dalton was holding Gruden back, or was Gruden holding Dalton back, or this idea that we're going to find out with RG3. Was it just the mental side and the physical side of the injury, and now he'll get back? And Gruden, if we buy into Gruden making Dalton better, how much better can he make RG3? On the flip side, was it Kyle Shanahan? And then you have to ask yourself about the Cleveland offense. You see how all of these dots connect. And at the very least, you should maybe not have a hard stance, but be open to changing projections, rankings, the way you're going in your draft based on signs that we may see early on, and especially early on in the season. I think that's we're going to draft our teams. And Matt, I was quoting you, by the way, on your 4 prongs. That the draft is just one prong of the 4 that you need to win your fantasy league. And in fact, you can totally blow the draft. And if you're good in the other 3, if you're good at trades, you're good at the waiver wire, and you're good at setting your lineup, you can still win your league. And I think adjusting to coordinators and what we learn early on in the season, those first few weeks. And I'll say this too. I hear a lot of people in the first few weeks of the season saying, "Don't overreact, don't overreact, don't overreact." No, I'm going to say don't underreact, because we're seeing the league change so much from year to year, and you have to have a good reason. But if it's a new coordinator and you see these things clicking in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, then ignore that at your own risk and say, "Oh, it'll just return to what we thought was going to happen." Because you know what? 2 or 3 weeks into the season, I don't really care what we thought was going to happen. I care what's actually happening right now. I want to go back to an Audible Live question here, and this in some ways goes back to something we talked about last week, and the wonderful Zen Koan gene that you wove about Rob Gronkowski. But Heath K. Karthak asked, is it reasonable to compare Heath Miller's 2013 ACL situation to Gronkowski's for the upcoming season? Compare and contrast those two, both the specimens and why you might treat it differently as far as evaluating these guys for your fantasy draft.
I'm a little self-conscious about talking about Gronk again. I saw some discussions about the Gronk discussion. I went back and watched it, which I never do, and I probably should watch myself a little bit more because I might actually improve on some things. But do I really look like that when I talk? Like, oh, man. So Heath Miller. No, I don't think you can compare Heath Miller to Gronk much at all. I think there's probably 10 years difference between the two of them. They're very different type of players. Heath Miller is a fundamental, relies on strong routes, good body positioning. Not that Gronkowski doesn't, but there's a lot more athleticism in Gronk's game. So in some ways, yes, you can compare the two. An ACL injury can be worrisome for other reasons for an athletic player like Gronkowski. Is he going to be as athletic as he was before? Is any loss of athleticism going to be too much for him to overcome? Whereas with a Heath Miller type situation, if he loses even a quarter of a step, he may no longer be able to pull off the veteran moves and the smart things that he does in the past. But Miller's injury and Gronkowski's injuries were similar in that there was a little bit more than the ACL in both cases. But short of that, I don't know that I would compare them that much more. I think, Miller's injury was a little bit later, and they were pretty close to the same time of year. But I think the big difference is just age-related and recovery-related with those guys. I'm not worried about Heath Miller coming back. I think we saw enough of him last year that I think he'll be good to go as we start. But I don't know that I would, just because of the different body types, the different types of play, I don't know that how comparable those two injuries actually are.
Well, you touched on the kernel I want to pull out of that question, because I do think there's something for people to take out of it, because I don't think they're that similar. But I do want to ask you a follow-up on Heath Miller. Should we buy into a second year back at the N+2 effect for Miller, or is the advanced age and point he's at in his career mean, well, there might not be that much for him to get back now that he's more than 1 year removed from the ACL?
I don't know if you're going to like my answer there either. It's really hard to tell in this age group whether or not he's hitting his natural decline, and how accelerated his natural decline is going to be because of an injury, that he had a significant injury like this at his particular age. I think, yes, in his case, because of the timing of the injury and because of how significant the injury was to that knee joint, I don't know that this is N+2 as much as it is N+1.5, right? So,
right.
Yes, I will. This is another situation similar to Roddy White, where I think we'll know pretty early in camp if we see him moving well during preseason games, and if we see him moving well early in the season. Then yes, I think we can trust that that's going to continue, and that he'll whatever his natural decline was going to be is what it's going to be, and it may not be accelerated by this injury.
And again, I want to just, for everybody out there, I want to call attention to this again. And again, buy an app and get our training camp reports for free, because there are a lot of our takes where you can tell we have this little spot, a little blank or parentheses. I shouldn't be trying to do things with my hands, really. Like Ricky Bobby, I don't know what to do with my hands. But we have, say, here's my analysis, but I'm waiting to see this. A football. Matt's smart. Give him a football. There's a lot of spaces in our analysis where we're ready to say, if we start to observe this in training camp in the preseason, then we're going to fully go this direction. And if we observe this other thing, then maybe we'll go the other direction. And our rankings and our projections often reflect splitting that difference. Or as you said on the couch this week, Matt, you're starting out, and I'm going to use this as a perfect segue. You're starting out with the least enthusiastic, assuming the least positive things, and then you're going to start moving somebody up as you observe what is possible to be excited about them, but you're not assuming that going in and then having to move them down. Because, well, first of all, as people that provide this advice and experts, it's kind of hard to say, oh, I told you to draft Justin Hunter in the 8th round, now I would probably draft him in the 10th or 11th round. But if you say, hey, I would wait until the 10th round right now, but if I start to see these things, I'm going to tell you to move them up. So let's get right there to Justin Hunter, because we do have a question from Anthony Browner. And man, if we don't ever have ideas, Anthony Browner is going to give us lots of ideas. And we've already touched on a couple of his questions. He's our finger on the pulse of what's on people's minds. Go Vikes 910. He asked about Justin Hunter, and this is timely because. And we talked about him on the couch this week, but I especially want to get Kian's thoughts here, because I know Kian was recapping the Titans games for us last year, so he watched every play of Hunter, and he has that background to talk about him. But to give everybody else out there a little background, he was a player. There was an interesting discussion this morning on Twitter with myself and a few other people, because we've heard Sean Jefferson, the wide receiver, say he's the receiver that could put us over the top. He's that good. We've heard Michael Preston say that he could be as good as Randy Moss, which that's why I compared him to pre-ACL injury, and everyone's like, no, really, yeah, really, he has that potential. We also saw Jason Michael, the offensive coordinator, say something along the lines of he needs to be pushed. Now, one of the things we could talk about here as a side topic is parsing these off-season comments, and sometimes a positive statement can still be a negative indicator if it's an indicator that a player needs his confidence pumped up, or if a team is publicly putting a little pressure on him, saying, hey, we need him to do this. Like, why is a team doing that? Anytime a team says something publicly about a player, it's calculated. Okay? Very rarely is it just, we're just over beers, and I think he's going to be great this year. There's a reason. But let's just get to Hunter and talk about what we've observed and where we're at on him right now. And I'm going to start with you, Kian, because you have that background. Is he somebody, based on what you saw last year, based on what you expect from him, that you're maybe targeting in your drafts, or is it the opposite? Do you feel like from what you saw last year, sure, you get why people like him, but you're going to use that pick on another upside receiver?
No, I think I saw that Michael Preston quote this week about Randy Moss as well. And it's interesting to me because I know Matt compared him to Randy Moss when he was coming through the draft. And how he turned the season. during the season, I compared him to Randy Moss on Football Outsiders. The talent there, to me, is unbelievable because he's not only huge, he goes up and gets the ball at its highest possible point every single time he has the opportunity to. We saw a few catches last year. I think he hit 2 or 3 touchdowns where he's literally jumping over defensive backs, and you just think it's insane. And they played much of last year with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's got a terrible, terrible deep ball. So his opportunities weren't as good as they could have been. If Jake Locker stays healthy, I'll be really, really optimistic about him, but I'm not that optimistic about Jake Locker staying healthy. I think I've been seeing him go in the 8th and 9th and 8th, 9th, 10th around that area, and I don't think I'm going to jump on him there. I see other better options at the time, like Greg Jennings, like I said, but I can understand the why you'd want to draft him or even overdraft him because you believe in that talent that he does have. In terms of are they trying to build him up because they need to build him up? I believe last year he was suspended for a game for team rules or something. So that would give me a little bit of pause, but I'm not going to try and dive too far into something like that. If you're just judging him based on talent, you have to say, yeah, he's phenomenal because he's shown signs of developing into an all-round receiver, and he has that ridiculous talent to just go up and get a ball and take it away from the defensive back.
Yeah, and I'm not going to, and I see brand new football. We were doing a round of hiring at Football Guys, by the way. One of our brand new staffers, Scott Bischoff. Scott Bischoff. I already blew that. Scott Bischoff, GM Junior, among other things, is asking, and I'm just going to say it so Kian doesn't have to, because he wants me to ask you, Kian. And we don't resort to this kind of humor on the Audible, do we? Asking you who you're targeting in the fart round. So I'm not going to do it.
Just ask him to say 40 Shades of Green.
You can tell Gene's been here before.
Yes, I have.
Not your first rodeo. Okay, Gene, well, it's not your first rodeo on these medical things, so I want to go back to the key point. Again, these blanks that we're filling in. Jake Locker's health. You do a great job asking people to not. You did it great last week. You said, hey, let's stop. I don't remember the exact word you chose. Corrupting, I think, the term injury prone. Is Jake Locker somebody? And speaking of John Gruden, you can remember John Gruden with him in his little camp saying, like, why are you taking all these hits? Why are you doing all this stuff? And Jake Locker's like, that's just how I play football. Is Jake Locker somebody, Gene, that you have the red flag beside? At this point, it's more than just bad luck. It's more, there's something else to say. If I had to guess, I'm not going to guess that he's staying healthy. Or is that a narrative? Is that something that we're imposing on Locker and really we're forcing a square peg in a round hole?
Well, I like to use the example of DeMarco Murray. So Murray had a broken leg and something that we were worried about being a midfoot injury in the past. And you might put those two things together and say, well, he's definitely got some sort of tissue issue, which is what some orthopedists and trainers, athletic trainers, would like to call it. And you might put Locker in that category because he's had the Liz Frank issue and he's had a major hip problem. And some other things along the past. I'm really reluctant to say that players are injury prone, meaning forward thinking. So has he been injury prone in the past? Without question. Does that raise some more risk in your mind that he may not be able to get through a full season completely healthy? The answer to that is yes, but I think you bake some of that into his projections and his expectations anyway. I just think that's part of it. I don't know that even people that put a raw number of games in the projections, where I'm only going to project such and such a player for 12 games. I think that gets baked in a little bit, and I know I'm dancing around the question here a little bit, but it's hard for me to say because again, people would have said that about DeMarco Murray last year, and that's not the way it played out. We may see that happen with Rob Gronkowski, who hopefully gets through a 16-game season this year despite multiple major injuries, ACL, broken arm, back surgery at his young age. So am I bumping him down draft boards? Yes, but I think that has more to do with the number of other strong quarterback options there are out there as much or more than it does his number of significant injuries that have cost him big amounts of games in the past.
Okay, so and this is all part of the original On the Couch program of eventually getting Gene to cry. Not tonight, but we're laying the groundwork. No, I'm just going to ask you though, because I want to go back to what Kian said. Kian saying, "Hey, if you think Jake Locker can stay healthy all year, then go after Justin Hunter." If someone just stopped you on the street and said, "Gene, What's your opinion, man? I mean, I think Justin Hunter could be the man this year if Locker can just play 14 or 15 games. What do you think?
Where are you taking Justin Hunter?
His ADP, 9th, 10th round.
Sure. Yeah, so if you're looking at a guy that's going to be your wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 that you think has wide receiver 2 upside, that player is talented enough to probably succeed regardless of the quarterback. So, yeah, Charlie Whitehurst, necessarily. But if there's an NFL quality quarterback, an NFL arm that can get the ball down the field, and you think Justin Hunter is that type of talent, I mean, I can remember Carl Pickens. I mean, Jeff Blake. I mean, think of all the guys.
Sure.
Somebody has to catch. If Jake Locker is not what we thought he would be, or he's not healthy enough, and we end up looking at Charlie Whitehurst or whoever it ends up being, whatever veteran replacement they bring in, so that they don't have to so they don't have to use Whitehurst. There's still going to be. I mean, we're not talking about an offense that's only going to put up 2,000 passing yards. So if you think Justin Hunter has the talent to be effective with Jake Locker, then he probably has the talent to be effective with other players. And if you're asking me, are you going to take him? If you believe in Jake Locker and you believe that Jake Locker is finally going to fulfill the promise he had in the past, are you going to take him, Justin Hunter, as a wide receiver 3? No. But yes, if he's, if you're looking at a tier full of other guys with upside who may prove to be wide receiver 2s or wide receiver 3s if everything goes right for him, then yes, absolutely go get Justin Hunter in the 9th or 10th round.
Yeah, so don't let the Locker.
I don't know. I feel like I'm dancing
around. I mean, it sounds like, and you can tell me whether I'm putting words in your mouth or not. Basically, you're saying don't let Locker's injury history. Somebody needs to do it
because I don't think I'm giving very straight answers.
No, you're answering honestly to the you're answering honestly to the best of your abilities to predict or see these things based on what we know. And it sounds like what you're saying is don't let Locker's injury history stop you from taking Hunter if you believe in Hunter.
Yeah, yes. So don't be afraid to reach for a talented player above his ADP if you believe in the talent of the player. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Sure.
Mostly I'm just trying to put Kean to sleep with my lullaby voice here a little bit.
Yeah.
Is it working?
We will do that. This could be a challenge for the Audible Live if Kean is continually willing to be up this late to see if we can put him to sleep. But I don't know. I mean, he's defying some sort of physics, although he's also a lot younger than us.
But Bishop Sankey's going to run for 2,700 yards.
Low blow. No, and Matt and I discussed Justin Hunter at length on the couch this week. I encourage everyone to check it out. But the story is not that nuanced. I mean, Justin Hunter has. If you're looking for somebody who physically has the ability in a Josh Gordon, Alshon Jeffrey kind of way, he does. Nobody who watches football and sees accurately is going to deny that. Justin Hunter has that talent. My lights are flickering, guys. So if I drop out, please.
It's lightning's about to strike.
Yeah, right. Maybe we could catch that. Wouldn't that be an awesome thing to catch for posterity on the Hangout? But Hunter is, I mean, this is what you're starting to lay out in your strategy. You have these picks, and I think Kean laid it out really well in the sense that you are. I mean, it bugs me a little bit when I see people just tout a player and don't add, like Gene asked, what round are we talking about? Because Zach Stacy's a good example. I've been debating Zach Stacy with a few people, and I won't be surprised if Zach Stacy's whole 2014 looks like the second half of his 2013. I'm not saying that's impossible, and in fact, I think that if you were to ask me to make a 50-50 type call on will Trey Mason considerably cut into Zach Stacy's work, I'm going to say 55-45 or 60-40 no. But I have 1/3 round pick. Okay, I'm not. If I compare the questions about Zach Stacy to the questions about C.J. Spiller or Andre Ellington or Rob Gronkowski if he's still there, I'm not using that 3rd round pick on Stacy. It was a great discussion with me and Mike Clay and JJ from Number Fire and many other people about Cordell Patterson. It's the same thing. You may buy into some of this narrative about how Cordell Patterson, we talked a lot about the Minnesota offense, how he could, and man, his ceiling, we really don't know how high it is. And 2, 3, 4 weeks into the season, we could say, wow, yeah, that's the guy. He's going to be, and that's one of the things I should step back and say too. We have been staring at this stuff for so long that we feel like, okay, here's the range of possibilities. Here's the top and here's the bottom, and he's going to be somewhere in here. That's not true. The range of possibilities is much larger than we think it is right now. And again, I'm going to emphasize that first few weeks and adjusting quickly and taking stances and not just saying, I'm going to wait a few more weeks and see if things return to normal and then I'll decide what to do. Too late. So I think that these are all very important things to keep in mind. But again, going back to that point, that you get 1 or 2 picks in that 9th, 10th, 11th round range on a pure upside player. Is Justin Hunter one of those players? Yes. Is he the best one, or is he the one that you should advocate? Well, that's a deeper question. So we're starting to sketch these things out. Certainly training camp and preseason are going to fill in even more of the blanks. Going again back to our questions from the Audible Live, and this is one, it's kind of open-ended, and I guess Zach Stacy, I don't really mean Zach Stacy to be, a pure transition into this. Art Vandelay, Latex Salesman 7, of course, has a question about a narrative for a top avoid running back candidate in rounds 1 to 6. So Matt, I'll give you that one first. Give me one of your top avoid guys in the first 6 rounds at running back, and why.
Chris Johnson. I mean, I think that's right away for him. I mean, when you look at the fact that the New York Jets have not figured out over the past few years who to use, when to use them, when to take them out, how their offensive line and passing game works in conjunction with their running game. They seem to not have good timing when they take guys out who are just starting to get into a rhythm. And I can totally see this being a situation where Chris Ivory ends up playing well enough that Chris Johnson has a couple of bad games, or he fumbles the ball, or he tries to dance around too much, and next thing you know, Coach Ryan is pulling him from the game. So he's a player that I just don't trust. I think that the Titans line has probably been a better unit on the whole than the Jets line has been in the past. So this is a situation that I wouldn't feel good about. And I just want to say one thing about this whole Jake Locker injury thing. I understand exactly what Gene's saying, and who am I to disagree with a doctor talking about injuries? But I would say that there is a level of wisdom that people show on tape about how they play the game. And you can be wise and aggressive, wise and somewhat reckless almost, and stride that line, and just foolish with how you use your body. And I would say that Jake Locker and Rob Gronkowski both fit in that same category. The difference is that Rob Gronkowski can win your league. Jake Locker might help you be a low-end quarterback one at best. I would much prefer to take the risk with Rob Gronkowski even early, despite the fact that he does somersaults and lands on his head and bounces up and is okay 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe he's learned something now that he's had his knee ripped apart and the issues that he's had with his arm, that he might be a little bit more cautious. But Jake Locker, I'm not sure I trust him to be able to do that, because we're still looking at a guy who's trying to figure out how to be accurate when he has terrific form, and so I think that he relies a little too much on his athleticism. So it's just a point that I would consider, is that look at how these guys, if you watch enough games, look at how these guys play in terms of their recklessness and their decision making. Because to me, Locker's going to rely on his legs and rely on that athleticism he has, which is great. And I would not count on him to finish a season.
And I think that you bring up, recklessness is a good word to bring up with these guys. And I do think that with Locker, and you're not necessarily relying on Locker, but some of the players like Bishop Sankey, like Justin Hunter, that would certainly be benefiting from a healthy Jake Locker. It fits in as an element of their value. One question I want to just address really quickly, and this is from Go Dodgers, asking about making the jump to a 2-quarterback league and strategy. Ha ha! We got you covered next week on the couch. A special 2-quarterback edition coming up with Sal from XN Sports and Sportable. His handle on Twitter, it's like late round quarterback. He's 2-quarterback fan FFB. And Kyle Wachtel from football guys talking two quarterback leagues, two quarterback strategy. And those of you who are getting annoyed at watching everybody wade at quarterback and how deep quarterback is and how it makes quarterback strategy less interesting, well, two quarterback leagues return that. It's going to do a couple more questions, and then we'll get on with our lives, and maybe Kean can get some sleep, but he doesn't need any sleep. I mean, he's running on pure adrenaline because he's young. It was piss and vinegar. Bishman has a good general question, and this is a classic, one of our credos here. Know you're scoring a lineup. Know you're scoring a lineup. Know you're scoring a lineup. And he asks about bonus scoring, like additional points for 300-yard games, and I'll add in distance bonuses for touchdowns. Gene, I'll give you this one first because you're rigorous about this and you're very objective about it. So if you are doing our football guys at Fessel Alpha, Jason Woodrow running the show there, it has bonuses. Do you approach that draft differently with distance and yardage, big game bonuses than you would another league?
Well, I think the answer is objective. You can use Doug Drennan's databases to see how often those games happen. And with 10 additional points added, then yes, I think there's probably going to be some changes in the rankings because of that. But I think you can set up sham leagues in MFL with those scoring systems and see how it affects. You can compare that particular league to a league without that bonus and see how the rankings change in previous years to see how effective and how important that may be. I imagine that level of additional points added is probably going to do something. But I think, as you said, to be rigorous and objective about it, just run a league or run a sham league or run something in Drennan's data dominator tools to see just how often that happens and how important it's going to be for your league.
Matt, Fessel Alpha, distance bonus, big play, big game, bonus leagues, do you change your approach?
To an extent, I think that I look at certain players and offenses that they fit into and look at some of those tendencies. Peyton Manning gets bumped up a good bit. Jimmy Graham gets bumped up a good bit. Some of the vertical guys who I think are going to get heavy volume get bumped up a bit. But to me, it has to be a combination of big plays and volume. The volume has to be there to support it. But it's not something that I'm going to go overboard with. It may bump a guy up a round or maybe a half a round and give me an opportunity to say that that's that added luster to be able to draft a guy. Okay, and Keen, anything you want to chime in on here with the big play, big game type distance bonuses, and whether you might bump certain players up if you're in a league like that?
Well, the interesting thing to me is the tendency there is when you're dealing with guys like running backs, you go for the speedsters, the quick guys who you think are going to break off big plays. But then you look at last year and you've got a guy like Alfred Morris, who I think led the league in 20-plus yard plays last year. So I tend to just not really change my approach. If I believe in a player, I believe in a player. Because if Morris is going to be breaking off 20-plus yard runs, I'm not going to take him thinking that he's going to be a big player before the start of the year. So I don't really think there's an added benefit to second-guessing yourself.
Yeah, well, and that's a good one. We're a little over an hour here, and I guess we can end on that one topic. I wish I could remember the follower of mine that brought this up, and I basically just retweeted what he said because I thought it was a really good point. I'm trying to find it because I want to give this person credit, but I might not be able to do it. But it does go back to Alfred Morris. And it's been interesting watching Alfred Morris fall in drafts. And it seems like, unlike some other players where the slide will stop, the slide continues for Alfred Morris. And what was brought up was that, hey, it was Eric Sinn, Sinn, who said, "What's up with loving Robert Griffin III and being down on Alfred Morris? If RG3 has bounced back, won't Morris validate ADP?" And then we touch off a little, but I think this is another one of those things where, and guys, my thinking is constantly, I don't want to say evolving, but changing. Darren Sproles is a good example where a couple of weeks ago I thought I had a moment where I was like, are we underestimating what Chip Kelly can do with Darren Sproles? And in that moment, and really in the last couple of days before that, I had been having this. Honestly, I was thinking about passing out some dynasty trade offers for Alfred Morris because he was a damn fine running back in his first 2 years. It was not a system. This is not Mike Anderson. This is not Olandis Gary. So, Kean, you were one of the first ones to point that out when you saw in the draft I was doing Morris fell to the late fourth. But it almost just follows from your answer. Is Alfred Morris somebody that you're targeting? Is he somebody that you maybe even jump ahead of C.J. Spiller, who we already talked about being bullish on, because this point that if we think RG3 is going to be good, we think this offense is going to be good. I mean, we saw Morris's floor last year. He's still a mid-low running back 2 on a horrible Washington team. If it's a decent Washington team, watch out.
Well, I was actually doing a draft yesterday where I started with Graham in the first, Martin in the second, Spiller in the third, and Morris in the fourth. And I wasn't intending on taking Morris there, but I was just bemused that he was falling to the fourth. I know he's not going to catch a load of passes. It was a PPR draft. But I agree with you. I think he's a very talented running back. I don't think it's just a scheme thing. I think like Jay Gruden's not stupid. I know he gets a lot of bad press because of the way he used Giovanni Bernard last year, but a lot of coaches tend to do that with rookie running backs, I think. I think Jay Gruden will really like him and look to give him the ball the way he did with Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. And I know their offensive line isn't great. We don't know what the scheme is going to be like. But I'm always going to be someone who buys into talent. And I'm going to buy into his talent because I do think he is legitimately a very good player.
Matt, are we overthinking this? I mean, Marshawn Lynch doesn't catch that many passes anymore, and we'll take him in the first or second round. Is this Morris slide going to be something we all look back on participating in and wondering why we did it?
Yeah, I mean, Morris in the fort, I'd rather make Morris the fort for your team. I mean, he's the guy that you certainly want to be your guy. I mean, I agree with Kean completely. I had to make fun of you, buddy. But, I mean, especially for the way I talk sometimes, when neither of us could understand each other when we first got on the phone. But I mean, certainly, certainly I think that Morris is the type of player that you want to have. He's got... he wears defenses out. He's a high volume back, and then you have the constraint plays with Robert Griffin now because he's going to be able to run and generate big plays with his legs, and then you're going to stretch defenses out with Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Thomas and Jordan Reed, Noggin healthy enough to go. You look at that, and I think that this is a much better offense. And you got rid of Mike Shanahan, who no longer has some, is trying to overprotect Griffin and keep him on the field with these max protect schemes. So to me, he's probably one of the safest picks in the draft if he falls to you in the third round. And if you're going to wait, and if you get him in the fourth, that's just an absolute steal. I mean, you might as well, that's like robbing a Brinks truck right there.
Yeah, and I do think that the non-PPR bonus style of his stat lines is maybe over-influencing things. I do think that we've seen, and I mean, I haven't run any numbers on it or anything, but mobile quarterbacks, speaking of Chris Johnson, CJ2K was with Vince Young. Mobile quarterbacks help. The threat of the running quarterback helps. And it goes both ways. I like the way that Eric brought this up because Morris and his running prowess helps Griffin by keeping 8 in the box, or at least keeping that threat of the run. And a running back, what I love so much about, I probably told this little tale, not a tale really, but just describing Morris this way. That's what I love about watching him run the ball, is he runs as if there's no defense. It's like he runs really hard in a direction, and he runs into something like, what was that? I mean, he has no regard for the defense, no regard for his body. He runs it reminds me of watching Frank Gore earlier in his career. When you talk about the bull in the china shop, that's Alfred Morris. You love the way this guy runs, and that hasn't changed. He ran that well last year, at times better. Honestly, he looked improved. It was the team that went downhill. But if he is as good as he is, which he will be, that will help Griffin in his bounce back. And if Griffin does bounce back, well, that'll just open things up for Morris. But I guess, Gene, I can toss it to you, the last take of the night, because I don't know that we've really gotten that deep into Griffin, but the way all these things intersect, the early outlook, again, your tears are to come, but the very early knee-jerk reaction to Morris falling to the late third, fourth round, is it a mistake?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake. Just looking at Morris's production over the last couple of years, volume, as you said, and he's going to be active around the goal line. If he gets to double-digit touchdowns, give him 3 more touchdowns last year, and he was a back end of the top 10 back. In 2012, in pretty typical scoring systems, he was a top 5 back. So, if he gets to double-digit touchdowns, if he gets the volume at his current yards per carry, he doesn't need more than 10 catches to be a top 5 to 10 back. And if you're getting that caliber production in the 4th round, as Matt says, it's a definite steal.
So again, what's the takeaway here? Going all the way full circle from Spiller to Morris, you don't need to take your running back 2 in the 2nd round. You can get him in the 3rd round this year. Use that 2nd round pick for Gronkowski, or Alshon Jeffrey, or Antonio Brown, or Peyton Manning if he falls, whatever you want. And if you don't take a running back in round 1, you don't really have to be that freaked out, because you're going to get a running back 2 with running back 1 upside in the 3rd round, and it's on, guys. By the time we talk next week, training camps, we're going to have all that data, filling in some of those blanks, starting to fill in some of those blanks. Definitely appreciate Kian joining us, Kian Fahey, everybody joining us from across the pond. Matt wearing his hat with style. And
in the fort with my turkey leg.
In the fort. Guys, I don't even want to think about what would happen if we had, some international edition of the Audible, because we would all embarrass ourselves. Kian is a good sport for putting up with all of us.
You can understand me. You won't want to hear Sam. Kian's probably
Now he's talking about Sam Monson, right? From PFF? Yeah. Oh, man. See, there you go. So we're all, even Kian, joining in the fun. And you guys all join in the fun with us every week. Thank you so much. It's coming. You feel it. The finger in the light socket feeling is going to be back. It's going to be not even football for the next month plus. It's just going to be practices and preseason games, and we're going to be flipping out over everything with you out there. We appreciate it. Again, get those apps, free training camp reports. If you use the Cloud Sync option, if you get the mobile draft dominator, or you get our magazine, you will get free training camp reports. And by the end of this, folks, you're going to subscribe. Because if you love football, you love fantasy football, you love football guys, you need to be an insider pro. You need to join us with Audible every week. Cecil will be back soon, but hey, if he needs more time off, I don't mind hosting. I don't mind getting to call the shots, and I hope that you guys don't mind it either. We appreciate your time and attention, the most precious thing you have. Yeah, I'm the bus driver. The wheels on the bus continue to go round and round. The world continues to turn, and football is almost back. So stay with the Audible and stay classy.